You don't understand your data, and the next thing you are doing is rushing into analysis. That's immediately a recipe for disaster. If you want to understand the techniques to understand your data, this video is for you. Now let's get right into it. Now let me show you. Like I spoke about, this is the part 6. You could check the previous parts, and this is a build up, and you really want to check the other one. So first few things is you want to know why do I even need to understand the data set in itself. So after understanding what the stakeholder want, there's overarching question which I spoke about in the previous video. The next step is you need to understand your data, like know what your data contains. And that is why when you've been working for a company for a while and they ask a particular type of information, you know what to look for, you know if the data has that information. But if you're working on a new project, there's that learning curve of you understanding your data, and that is where data comprehension comes in. So in this video I will talk about more of techniques for you to understand your data better when you have the questions from the stakeholder. So there's data comprehension, helps you better understand like data, so that you need to know if this data need a lot of cleaning, if you needed to take out some things, or is this data even sufficient to be able to answer the question that the stakeholder asked of you. It helps to profile recommendations to your stakeholder and say, oh, you wanted this, but you actually have information that can do XYZ, right? So when you understand your data better, it's going to better help you serve your stakeholder. It also helps you to strengthen to know the strength and limitation of data and say, okay, this data is very good when it comes to XYZ kind of reporting, and it's not good for this type of reporting. Maybe there's a lot of missing information. So understanding data is just looking at it critically. It also helps you to know if the analysis is doable. Some of you, the analysis is not doable. It's not your fault. It's not that you don't have the techniques to be able to do the analysis, just because of what the stakeholder asks you to do. You don't have the data to do it, and there's no magic you can perform with that. So what are the types of data to look out for? First of all, you want to know, is it qualitative or quantitative? Most of the data you will get is quantitative. That's data that has rows and columns. Also, is a code book available? So when you see the code book, in case you don't know what a code book is a data that describes the data, that explains what is in the data itself. Some also call it metadata. In my previous video I talked about that in detail. So that also helps you to understand the data better. So one of the things you want to ask yourself is, what number of data is required for the analysis, right? So there is, what columns do I need to be able to make this analysis done? Those are questions you have to start to think as you look at your data. You also want to know what are the data that is required? Like, do you need multiple data source, or like is it just one table? Understanding if this data can literally answer the question. So that's the question you're starting to pose yourself before rushing into, oh, what's the numerical, categorical, bar chart, pie chart? No, not that. Also, what's the sample size? So that's like also the number of the columns, right? Like the sample size is how long is the data in itself. That helps you to know, okay, if you have 10 people or 20 people, you have the data to be able to answer the question, that's still a very small sample size. So that's, when you talk to the stakeholder, you're probably like, oh, are we really sure we want to rely on this sample for this analysis? Another thing also you want to start to think about is how much of cleaning is required in your analysis. Let's look at the practical example of a data set. This data was gotten from Cargo. So we see that we have customer ID, customer name, we have the customer email, we have the phone number, we have the address, we have the city and this country. A lot of times we start to sieve out in our mentally, like, what is data that is not useful. Technically, for analysis, we want a little bit of variation, and we want something to be sort of, we don't also want too much variation for us to make comparison, especially if it's a text data or a categorical data. So because this is a sort of a text data and every customer has their unique ID, this might not give us much of an insight. So we probably would discard customer ID. So if I were you will create a copy of this data and probably delete the customer ID information, so you can look less information. When you have less information that you're looking at, it helps you to be able to focus on the specifics. Sometimes less is more. You take out the names is also the same thing. I don't think you can do anything with the analysis with names. Email address, you also can't do anything much with it. Phone number, the same thing. Also address, except you are doing some form of geospatial analysis. City, maybe you start to make sense. So we see that for city we have Los Angeles, we have San Jose. So we are seeing some a little bit of variability in the city, also variability in the country. For the zip code, we might not necessarily use it if we are not using a geospatial analysis. So for the most part, if the business wants a like analysis and this data cannot answer it cannot, just because the information is not here. But this just shows you some bunch of information that you most likely will not focus on when you start looking at your data. But if you look at this data, we see that there's some variability. The first thing is you need to start to think about is what is the focal variable in this stuff. So we see here we have attrition. So we start to think about, oh, maybe this is thinking about like what are the factors that leads to attrition or people leaving a company. So we see there's business travel, there's age as a categorical data. So you know, okay, I'm treating age as categorical data. There's current employee. We see department, BRD and sales. We also see staff number. This might not be something that you might use more for the analysis because it's also unique for almost every employee. This is also redundant employee number. You see it's almost the same thing as the staff number. Gender is something we can use because we see we have a bunch of females, also a bunch of males. We also see marital status is okay. Overtime, yes or no, over 18. You see that the only thing that we have here is just here, so there's no variability. So we probably would not use this over 18 information. Time training time last year, we could use it. So we have age as a numerical, we have age as a categorical. So if you use both of them, you are going to be having redundancy in your data. It's not even good for analysis. So that's a whole discussion in itself. But you gotta choose one, either age or age category. We also see this data set here, which is almost like the same thing as this one. Just begin to have like the hourly rates, just so many things that you can use. So the whole idea is how can I reduce some of the information that I have that I can process so that I can look at what is more important and start to think, okay, what's the most focal variable? What do I think variable that will be most related to this analysis when I am going into my analysis in detail. There's also this other data set. We have the ID. Obviously we will not use this ID. We have gender, we have marital status. So in case you have a code book, you start to wonder what does M and S means. But you can assume, oh, M is married, S means single. But some data might not just be as clear as that. So we have also income, we have number of children. You start to think about, okay, what's this data related? What's the focal thing? We can think of it as, oh, maybe what are the factors that influence how high your income is? Maybe it's like education, maybe it's your age. Or we can also look at, oh, maybe the question is actually looking at people that purchase the bike, right? So it's different lens. So that's one way. Just your thinking process is just observing and taking your time. And I think people like just more like some common sense stuff, and all of this comes with practice. And that's something that I think it's really going to be helpful for you as a data expert. I hope this video was a value for time. So the summary of it is that before you jump right into analysis, you already have the questions from the stakeholder. The next thing you want to do is to ensure that you have a study of your data. Study the data, understand what the data sets is, and you will be good to go. See you in the next video. Bye.